Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll begin in just a minute. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Lunch and Learn webinar, Informed and Supported Decision Making, a Primer. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Kelly Friedlander, and I'm going to be the facilitator for this webinar. Today, you'll hear from two individuals from the National Association of Direct Support Professionals, John Raphael, Director of Educational Services, and Desiree Lewis-Barr, Assistant Executive Director of National Association of Direct Support Professionals. This webinar is being sponsored by the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities and the North Carolina Money Follows the Person Project. Thank you both so much for your generous support. Before we begin, some quick housekeeping items. Everyone is currently on mute, but you have a chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Please enter questions you'd like the presenter to answer there throughout the webinar. At the end, we have about 15 minutes allotted for them to answer as many questions as possible. Slide handouts and a recording of the webinar will be available at the DD Council website, nccdd.org, next week. And finally, a short survey will be sent out after this webinar. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey and provide some feedback. This helps us make sure that we're providing you information that you find useful. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John and Desiree.
Well, Kelly, thank you very much for inviting us and for hosting such an important webinar series. And certainly for us, it's a vital topic. We're hoping to, we're packing a tremendous amount of information into about 45 minutes or so. We do want to give you about 15 minutes for questions. But the reality is this is absolutely a primer. This is something that we're going to do the broad brushstrokes of what informed decision-making is and what supported decision-making is. And to be also pretty honest, our focus is really on the role ultimately of direct support professionals when it comes to these topics of informed and supported decision making. So let's get right into it, and let's just we'll just introduce ourselves. Hold on here. There we are. Oops, sorry. There we go. I am the person on the right side of the screen, and my colleague and friend Desiree is on the left side of the screen. I'll introduce myself real quickly, being that I'm talking, and then I'll have Desiree introduce herself real briefly. My name's John Raphael. I'm a social worker. I have a master's degree in social work, and I've been doing social work for over 25 years now. But before that, I was a direct support professional working with children. So I've got over 30 years experience working in direct support and human services and social work. And ultimately, the work that I've done as a direct support professional and as a social worker always comes back to what we know as self-determination, right? That's what I was taught in social work school. It's what I was taught as a direct support professional. It's what I teach now as a teacher and trainer. With direct support professionals and with people with disabilities and with family members. Self-determination is something that really at the end of this webinar, it's going to be the ultimate product of helping people make decisions. And that's what this whole webinar is about, is how do we as helpers, as direct support professionals, even to a degree as family members, as siblings, perhaps as parents. How do we help people with intellectual disabilities make their own decisions? And that's a lot harder said than done. What we do at the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals, and my role there is we are a national organization, if you're not familiar with us, and we promote the knowledge, the skills, and the values, and the recognition of direct support professionals throughout the United States. And our primary role is to teach, to train, to support, to advocate with and advocate for direct support professionals. And my role is to direct those educational services that we provide. So I'm going to be one of the, I guess your facilitators today, but I'd like to have my friend and colleague Desiree Laux-Bear talk about her and introduce herself and what she's going to do today with you. Desiree.
Thank you, John. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. As John said, my name is Desiree Laux-Bear. I'm the Assistant Executive Director at the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals. That's one of the roles I play. I also work for the New York Alliance for Inclusion and Innovation on a grant for working on supported decision making here in New York State. It's a grant that is funded by the New York State DDPC, Developmental Disability Planning Council, and I work on that grant in conjunction with CUNY Hunter College in New York City and ARC of Westchester, which is near New York City. It's a 5-year grant, and we're in the middle of that grant creating a model for supported decision making for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the state of New York to either divert from guardianship or to restore their civil rights if they have guardians. And we, as I said, are in the middle of that project. My background is that I have worked in the field well over 30 years at this point. A majority of those years has been working in provider agencies, either as a direct support professional at the beginning of my career and ultimately running a residential program for almost, well, a little over 20 years. So I came to working in an association world in about 6 years ago and have been working for the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals for the last 6 months, helping do the great work that NADSP is known for. And I think with that, we can move on. Don't you think, John?
I think so. Thank you. So what we're going to do today is kind of combining two. They're different things, but they both deal with decision making. And one is called informed decision making, and the other is called supported decision making. And what we're going to do. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. I've got a computer that's on a little delay there. I apologize. Our objectives today is to define each of them, to define what is informed decision making, define what is supported decision making, and they are two different things. One you're gonna learn is much more informal, albeit very important and a skill, and the other, supported decision making, being something that is formalized and in fact can even go into being a legal process. And Desiree knows a lot about that. She's going to really give us a lot of information about supported decision making. And that's fine to understand what they are, but why? Why should we be concerned with each of these areas as people that have people with intellectual disabilities in our lives? Well, there's a very important reason, and it's the fact that everybody on this planet that's been born as a human being has certain rights, and some of those rights deal with the right to make their own decisions, to be self-determining. And that gets a little tricky in our field when we're supporting people or when we have family members that have intellectual or learning disabilities. And we're going to talk about that. But it doesn't mean that we deny people the right to make decisions. We will discuss that, historically and systematically, we have denied people the right to make decisions, and we need to address that. And part of why we're having this webinar is to specifically address it. So, and also, as I said, to be fully transparent, we are the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals, and we understand the vital role that direct support professionals, or DSPs, play in the lives of many people with intellectual disabilities. And the technology, if you will, the skill of informed decision making and the structure of what you're going to learn as what is supported decision making, it's a part of a direct support professional's responsibility to understand what those things are. So that said, we're gonna kind of blend the two, informed and supported decision making, to help you understand the differences, but then to hopefully give you, by the end of this webinar, some ideas and some skills and maybe even some tools to go and begin the process of assisting people to make their own decisions. So that said, what is informed decision making? And here I'm waiting for the delay on my machine. Okay, there we go. Come on now. Come on. There it is. Um, what is informed decision making? Now, this comes from a curriculum that was written several years ago by the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals. And the curriculum was specifically designed to teach people how to assist people in making informed decisions. And that might sound almost, you really need a curriculum, you need to teach people how to help people make decisions. Well, the reality is, yes, there's a lot of moving parts in one's own decision making abilities, let alone when a person that happens to be a direct support professional specifically is involved in helping somebody else make a decision. Just think about it right now, and you probably, anybody that's listening, and Desiree, you probably this morning, you made a decision about something. About something. I don't care what it was, whether it was something to eat for breakfast, whether it was to have a second cup of coffee, whether it was to, you know what, snooze alarms. That's a big decision in the morning. Um, and I think those of us that don't experience intellectual or developmental or learning disabilities, I think we take decision making for granted because we do know, based on some of the science and some of what we scientifically and medically know, when it comes to the processing and the understanding and the ability to make decisions, if you have an intellectual disability, and there's hundreds of different kinds of intellectual disabilities, decisions can take a lot more effort than not. And I think those of us that make our own decisions without necessarily needing assistance from somebody else, we do take it for granted, that process of decision making, because there's a lot of moving parts, as I said, in making a decision. And I'll just give you an example. This morning, I'm trying to get off sugar, and I like sugar in my coffee. And you know what I chose this morning? I wanted sugar in my coffee, and I know I probably shouldn't have it. So what I did, I usually put 2 sugars in my coffee, Desiree. And so I chose to put 1 sugar in my coffee. But that didn't come without me thinking about, oh my goodness, I'm going to feel bad that I put sugar in my coffee. For the last 4 or 5 days, I've not had sugar in my coffee. But for whatever reasons this morning, it was a cloudy, gray morning where I live, and I wanted sugar in my coffee because I wanted it sweet. So believe it or not, there was probably, when you dissect that decision, that silly decision about, what I'm going to have in my coffee, a lot goes into that. I didn't really think about that this morning, but in retrospect, when I thought about that seemingly silly decision, a lot went into that. Now let's take that, right? Let's take that, my own decision about sugar in my coffee, and we put that into what direct support professionals do day to day, helping people they support with decisions. And what you see in this slide, these 4 parts of what informed decision making is, that is the skill. That's the dissection. That's the actual process. Probably the most important word in this whole slide that you can see. And I want to go through each of these. What is informed decision making? And this is, as we look at direct support professionals and their role, it's a process where a person that's supported has gotten information and knowledge about a situation, or sometimes even a problem, right? Secondly, with the assistance of somebody, and usually a direct support professional, at least in our field, right? With the assistance of somebody, but it could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be, somebody, whomever, but it's with the assistance of somebody else. That person supported understands the choices available to them and the outcomes possible. And that's, you gotta understand both of those aspects of informed decision making. Thirdly, when that person who is going to make their final decision, whatever that decision is, that decision, it's about their personal values and beliefs, about what they want to have as that final decision, not the person supporting them, not the family member necessarily, maybe not even the guardian. And I think Desiree will talk about that in a little bit when it comes to supported decision making and guardianship. That gets a little tricky, but still, finally, it's the acceptance of the responsibility and the risk of that final decision, and that decision's not coerced. That's it, my friends. And that four-step, if you will, that definition of informed decision making is an informal skill that sometimes we do intuitively, but I think ultimately, if we teach direct support professionals, if we teach even family members about this process, it can help us help people make their own decisions. So I've thrown a lot at you. So Desiree, to you for a second. Do you have any comments about the informed decision-making process? Because supported decision-making is quite a bit different. So I want to get this through first.
Well, I want to just reflect on the fact that decision making is a skill. You know, it's one of those things that has to be practiced. And it's a direct support professional's responsibility as a direct support professional to assist people in practicing that skill. And it may not seem like a big deal to help somebody learn to make the decisions about what they're going to eat for breakfast or what they're going to wear today. And that skill is something that needs to be practiced in order to be able to learn how to make decisions about bigger decisions. Whether you have a medical procedure, which might engage supported decision making, or whether you're going to go and spend your money in a certain kind of way, which also could engage supported decision making, but it may not. So just direct support professionals need to recognize that every opportunity that they can provide to assist a person in practicing making decisions is a very important opportunity indeed, and it cannot be ignored.
Yeah, no, I agree. So that's informed decision making. Let's just kind of put on the screen what's supported decision making. So here it comes. I'm sorry, there's a little delay in my computer. I do apologize.
It's okay.
Come on now. Maybe it's the
There it is.
there we go. And let me just, before we get to the actual definition of supported decision making, it's to me, it's one of the most important and sobering quote that comes from something called um, an organization called Inclusion International, which is an international organization of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, self-advocates, if you will. And the organization's Inclusion International. Please look them up. It's a really, really very interesting and powerful organization. And what this organization does, and their mission is to unite and put people with intellectual disabilities from cross cultures together to talk about and to give the world reports, if you will, on what's going on in the lives of people with intellectual disabilities cross culturally. So, in 2014, there was a meeting of Inclusion International. It was on the continent of Africa, and the report that came out, the report that that group of people wrote, and this is from the perspective of people with intellectual disabilities. This is what they said to the world. This is not that long ago. That when people are supported to make decisions for themselves, they're seen as more capable by others. And here's the sobering sentence. When we're not allowed to make our own decisions, or when someone else makes our decisions for us, we're seen as less capable and having less value in our communities. That's a powerful statement from a cross-cultural perspective of people with intellectual disabilities. And I think the reason that we put this in this presentation is I think direct support professionals deal with this a lot in community-based settings, especially. Here's an example. You go into a restaurant and perhaps you're supporting somebody that has a visible disability. Maybe it's a physical disability. Um, there are times, and I think everybody can attest to this. I know I've experienced this numerous times. A wait staff comes to you, or a server comes to you, and they ask you, the person that doesn't necessarily have a visible disability, what that other person is interested in having for lunch or dinner. That is part and parcel about this quote. I think there is a notion that people with intellectual disabilities, certainly physical disabilities, they don't have capacity to make a decision, or they don't know how to make a decision. That there's nothing farther from the truth if you talk to the intellectual disability community. And this is a quote that I think can be a theme that we're going to have run through the rest of our time together during this webinar. Let me just go ahead and advance to what supported decision making is, and this is for you, Desiree.
Thank you, John. So what is supported decision making? And I'm just going to read this one definition of supported decision making, and then we'll go from there. Supported decision making is a series of relationships, practices, arrangements, and agreements of more or less formality and intensity designed to assist an individual with a disability to make and communicate to others decisions about the individual's life. This is different than informed decision making, and I'll explain to you why. But first, I wanted to let you know, supported decision making is not unique to people with disabilities. Everyone uses supported decision making. I like to share the story about purchasing a car. I don't like purchasing cars. I don't know a lot about cars. And a few years ago, I needed to purchase a new car. And I went to my supporters, who happened to be my husband and my son, who are both car guys. And I gave them a list of things that I liked about cars that included, I wanted an all-wheel drive vehicle because I live in upstate New York and it snows a lot here. Not something you probably have to deal with a lot in North Carolina. And I drive a long distance to work and back every day, so having to deal with snow is an important issue. I had heated leather seats. I wanted an SUV. And I wanted a really good radio, which might seem kind of frivolous, but it was on my wish list. And so my husband and my son were set off into the world to look for my new vehicle. And they knew that I enjoyed driving the Subaru that I had been driving for the last few years. And so they looked at Subarus and they looked at a number of other cars. And they came back to me with two cars to consider. And one was a Forester, which was an SUV, and it clicked off all the boxes on my wish list. The other was a WRX, and if you are a car person, you will know that a WRX was Subaru's version of a sports car. And it clicked off almost all the boxes other than being an SUV. And my son and my husband put the two cars beside each other and told me to go test drive them. And they gave me the opportunity to make an informed decision based upon the information they provided me. Now, if I was to go out and do this on my own, I would never have looked at the WRX. But they thought it might be a fun alternative and just to give me some other information, something to compare and contrast with. And I drove them both, and the SUV was just exactly what I expected it to be, and the WRX was a lot of fun. And I was left to make a decision using the information provided to me, and that included stuff like whether it was a V6 or whatever any of that other stuff is that I don't know anything about. But I was left to make a decision. They supported me by giving me information and then allowing me to make an informed decision. And though the sports car was a really good midlife crisis alternative, I did end up going with the SUV. So those are my supporters, and those are the people I selected, and they listened to what I needed, what I was looking for, and then they came back the way I asked them to give me information so that I could make a decision. They were the people I selected. Now, I say that if I was going to be making a different decision, let's say it was a healthcare decision, would I necessarily engage my 16-year-old son in helping me gain information? And the answer is no. I have a best friend who's a nurse, and I most likely would go to her if I had to make a serious healthcare decision because she would understand all of the lingo about that. But I would not go to her about purchasing a car. That's a supported decision-making arrangement that I arranged for myself. So people do it all the time. You will be familiar with healthcare proxies, powers of attorney, durable trusts. all of those kinds of formal agreements that already exist are supported decision-making agreements, where the person who is making those decisions is deciding who's going to help them in making those decisions and how those decisions would be made, and if that person would make that decision if they weren't capable of making it themselves, but they're in control of that.
So
So,
it's
go ahead.
interesting, Desiree. That's such a great explanation, of the supported decision-making process. But also, it almost begs the question, like, well, we just do this anyway as humans, right? Like it's almost naturally you do it. So that's where I think we get kind of caught in this little, not confusion, but I think it especially for direct support professionals, when we look at the lives of people with intellectual disabilities that we're supporting, sometimes it doesn't come naturally for people. So we have to formalize it, I guess. Is that what you would say?
Well, it's a matter, again, of teaching. And in the grant that we're working on, part of our process is teaching. We've learned that as we sit down with people with disabilities to start considering supported decision making, we go and ask them a series of questions.
Mhm.
And we take our time doing this and helping people become decision makers. And we start by, what kind of decisions would you want support with? Not every person with a disability is going to need somebody to help them make decisions about relationships or maybe money. Maybe they feel very confident in how they're making decisions.
Mhm.
So we start with, what kinds of decisions do you want somebody to assist you in making decisions regarding finances, where you live, how you spend your money, how you make healthcare decisions, where you go to work.
Right.
The next question is, who would you want to help support you?
Right.
And the answer may be one person. Frequently, we've found in our pilot that it tends to be a close family member, like a mom or a dad or a sibling, but
Right.
not always. And it doesn't always have to be one person for all decisions. It could be, I want dad to help me with money because I know he balances the checkbook, but I want mom to help me with healthcare because she always goes to the doctor with me.
Mhm.
And then, how do you want that support given? Is it a matter of collecting information like my supporters did with the car? Or is it a matter of helping communicate? Or, about the decision? Maybe I'm shy. Maybe, I don't feel confident in what I'm going to say, and I really want someone else to speak for me, but using, my decisions, not their decisions, not a substitute decision maker, but just a communicator.
Right.
Maybe it's a matter of just letting me bounce ideas off from them and sharing the options, or helping me to explore what the consequences of a decision and the benefits of a decision would be.
Mhm.
So how do we want that? And then the logistics. In what form does that support come? Is it, a regular meeting? Is it when I call?
Mm.
Is it when is it, a group of people? So it becomes more of the last piece is the logistical piece.
Right. Right.
And when you look at this, I mean, when we're exploring supported decision making with people with intellectual disabilities, we help them explore who are those decision makers, and then we assist them in speaking to their supporters to get on board with us.
Mhm.
We recognize when we talk about supported decision making that maybe it's not for everybody. It may be a process. It may take a while to get to a place where you can come to an agreement regarding who's going to be a supporter. But so we recognize it as not having to be for everybody. But we do look at it as being an alternative to guardianship or substitute decision making as it is.
Right.
We recognize with supported decision making that everybody has the ability to make choices, and they have a will and preference to things. And that may be your traditional communicators, and it may be your non-traditional communicators. And being able to be that supporter who recognizes people's will and preferences is a huge piece of the process.
Sure. And that's the big word, process, right? Process. So
It is a process.
so there's principles, and I think you've gone through some of them. And I think there's one thing on this particular slide, which are the principles of informed decision making and supported decision making. I think they do jive. They are intersected. But I get concerned. I'm thinking about the ethics of people helping people, right? And how much do you influence another person's decision? How much do you influence another person's will, their preferences, whether it is through, and we, in our definition, you can't, a final decision cannot be coerced. I use this when I train, like say somebody wants to get a tattoo, and and you are a person that doesn't really think that tattoos are something that people should have on their body. And so what you might do is you might tell this person, you might give them information, the fact that, yeah, to get a tattoo, it's very painful because, there's a tattoo needle gun that's used to penetrate your skin. And it's like the thousands and thousands of bee stings, and, you're going to bleed and you could get infected and your arm could fall off. Oh no, Desiree, you can't get a tattoo, is the underlying message, right? So how I guess the question is, how do you remain ethical when you're in the process of informed decision making or supported decision making with other people?
Well, I think, John, I'm going to interject at this point. I think part of it is, and especially in supported decision making,
Mm.
the person who is in the supported decision making agreement, the person with a disability, and we call that person a decision maker in our pilot.
Mhm.
That decision maker is selecting who it is going to support them, and they have the will to change that at any time. They have the ability to make those changes. So maybe I select you to be my supporter, but if I decide that you're not doing what I need you to do, I can choose somebody else.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know? So it really is about a relationship. It's about trust, and it's about making sure that, everybody is on the same page about something. And I think, when we talk about it in reference to informed decision making, I do want to point out a couple of the differences, and I should have done this maybe in the previous slide. Informed decision making, it's, as you've explained, typically going to be a direct support professional who may be working with someone to give them options. It is not necessarily a person that the person with the disability is going to choose to be giving them information. It's the person who may be hired to be with them, right?
Right.
Whereas in
Right.
supported decision making, it is all based upon the person with the disability choosing who is going to give them that information.
Got it.
And that's a huge, huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And
It's
that's
also about that person choosing where that information or what that information is going to be involved. So in what topic areas. It's not going to be, oh, well, here's what your choices are for breakfast, unless, of course, the decision maker says, I only want information from this person regarding the foods I eat.
I see. Yep. See, that's a really important thing, I think, for everybody to hear. That you just explained it very. You helped me clarify the difference between informed decision making and supported decision making. So thank you. Let's move to the highlights.
I'm sorry, I want to go back to that last slide too a little bit. The only other thing I want to say is the difference. The reason that even we look at supported decision making, we recognize that people with disabilities do not lack capacity simply because they have a disability. Most guardianship laws in the United States are based upon the determination that the person has a lack of capacity. But that's not typically something that is done by evaluation. A lot of times, and I can reflect on New York State specifically, but I do know many other states fall into this category, that guardianship is assigned just by virtue of the person having a diagnosis.
Okay.
And just because a person has a diagnosis of an intellectual disability does not mean they lack capacity to make choices.
Right. Right. And not to mention wills and preferences, which every
Correct.
human being on this earth has. So, no, thank you for that clarification. This is, I think, an important piece of informed decision making and supported decision making. One size fits all method, I think we're so used to in our field, whatever it might be that we're taught to do in our jobs as direct support professionals, right? We're so, like, let's use something very, very, very specific. CPR. CPR, yeah, yes, one size does fit all. We're trained how to engage with a person that has had cardiac arrest, and there's very specific things that we do in terms of chest compressions and breaths that you, I don't even know what it is these days because it changes based on research, right? So there, in some sense, we're trained as direct support professionals that this is what you do. This is what you do. This is what you do. This is what you don't do. And there it is. And you go ahead and you do your direct support and you live long and prosper. That is not the case, right? When it comes to helping somebody make a decision. So maybe speak to that when it comes to this one size fits all, that doesn't exist when it comes to helping people make decisions.
Well, again, it goes back to people's wills and preferences. So if everybody is cookie cutter, not everyone is going to choose the same thing for breakfast.
Yeah.
Not everyone is going to choose the same thing to do this weekend. You know, it has to be specific to the individual. Each person that you work with as a direct support professional is going to communicate different.
Yeah.
They're going to respond to situations, stressors, or opportunities different. And a really ethical and professional direct support professional is going to know who their audience is, who that person is, or they're going to actively work to learn who that person is if they're new to working with that individual, to help recognize the things that make that person unique in the way they communicate, in the way that they respond to things, into the way the information is shared with them. And we know that, you have to recognize that if you were to give it to everybody the same way, not everybody is going to respond the same way.
Right.
So you can't look at that one size fits all.
Right.
With the supported decision making, every individual is going to craft their own supported decision making arrangement or agreement, so that they're going to choose their own supporters. It's not going to be, the staff who are in the house necessarily. It may be a longtime staff person who's chosen to be a supporter. But if you're working in informed decision making, sometimes a decision maker is going to be, and I don't want to say this in a negative way, but stuck in with whoever happens to be on shift that day to
Sure.
provide that information. So you
Sure.
would hope that, the direct support professionals, they are ethical and well trained in informed decision making, so that they can respect how that person receives information, how they make that decision, how they react to their choices, and understand the potential benefits and consequences.
It's interesting. We haven't even said it yet in this last. Well, we've been on the line about a half hour, 35 minutes or something. We haven't uttered this, Desiree. Person-centered. Oh my goodness. What's wrong with us? We're doing a webinar and we haven't said the phrase person-centered, but what you just described, right? What you just described is the essence of being person-centered. When we look at what that means as a direct support professional, we hear it all the time. It's in our code of ethics. It's in oftentimes the conduct requirements that we have in the organizations for whom we work. Being person-centered, right? And really it is.
It's the essence of the CMS community rule.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's a beautiful thing. But again, it doesn't come, I think it comes much harder than it's stated. It's a process. It's getting to know people. And you said the word, and the primary word there is relationship, right? It's building relationships. So that's great. Let's go to this next slide. I think it's when we look at the formal, and you've talked about this, how formal does it get, Desiree, when it comes to supported decision making? Do you have to have like a lawyer involved and families involved? If somebody wants to have a circle of people that help them with their choices, what does it look like? Because I can speak to the informed decision-making process, but let's talk a little bit about what it actually looks like if somebody wants SDM.
Well, and that's an interesting question. So, in the United States, supported decision making is a relatively new idea. It has been around in other countries for many years.
Mm-hmm.
But in the United States, there's many states that are either piloting supported decision making, and there's a handful of states at this point that actually have supported decision making as part of legislation. For example, the state of Texas requires that before guardianship is issued to someone, that supported decision making has to be tried first. It's the least restrictive. And there are a lot of other states that are looking at legislation or in the process of passing legislation. And then there are many states that are doing pilots, like here in New York, or are trying different models. So it's going to look different in every different place. Even in North Carolina, back in 2007 or 17, there was some. The legislature had tried to pass a bill to have some research done to study supported decision making as an alternative to guardianship. Unfortunately, it failed, but I know that there are many organizations in North Carolina that are really continuing to pursue this. So I think our listeners in North Carolina will be hearing more and more about supported decision making in the years to come. So how do you go about doing it? Well, again, it's going to really depend from state to state. In Texas, it's going to be something that's a legally signed paper that can be done with an attorney, that is notarized, that describes what the agreement is. In New York right now, we are modeling something, we're piloting something where we have a full agreement that's written out, and we ask again that it's notarized, and we're working to be able to get it recognized in New York State as part of guardianship, or as a way that our guardianship laws may be changed. If it's something that's not part of what's recognized as supported decision making, but let's say it's a power of attorney or a healthcare proxy, then the rules that would be applied to those kinds of things would take place. And if it's an informal kind of arrangement, then it just could be, mom and dad are my supporters, and I go to them for certain kinds of things. Mm-hmm. I think about my 2 young adult children. We don't have a supported decision-making agreement. Neither of them have an intellectual disability, but we have an informal supported decision-making arrangement. And that means that my name is on with them on their bank accounts as they're in college, so that money can be transferred back and forth. That's a supported decision-making arrangement. I can support them as they need assistance in learning to manage money.
Got it.
I'm also on their FERPA, which is the form that allows me to speak to their respective colleges. I have been given permission through HIPAA to speak with their doctors if they need that kind of assistance. Those are all supported decision-making arrangements. Mm-hmm. So it can be as formal or informal as the situation dictates and the people involved would like.
Right. Right. No, that's a great explanation, and I'm thinking then you take it to the point of what informed decision making is as a skill, and direct support professionals, they may or may not engage in informed decision making. I'm of the mind, and I would argue that direct support professionals should understand what it is and engage in that process, regardless of any kind of supported decision making formalities or whatever. But I think the process of helping people make decisions is something that DSPs are doing all the time, and they better do it ethically, and they better do it in a person-centered way, using obviously their ethics and the technology of what informed decision making is about. So that's cool. Let's go to this next slide, because I think it's where we want to where we have to begin the process of hold on here. Come on now. Here we go. And I said this at the very beginning of the webinar, and we got about maybe 5 more minutes, and then we should probably open it up to questions, Desiree. But the big why should we promote informed decision making? Why should we understand and promote supported decision making? Because ultimately it is about this thing called self-determination, and it's something we all probably want in our lives. Every human being wants a sense of their self and their self-determination. We talk a lot about independence and helping people become independent, when we fully know that ultimately it's about interdependence. As human beings, especially in our society, we're very interdependent. We're not independent completely. We need the assistance of others for various reasons at various times and for various things. But I like this slide particularly when it comes to the fact that people that have greater self-determination, they are probably more interdependent. They have more community relationships, whether it's neighbors, whether it's friends, church members, whatever. They're healthier. We have absolute scientific research that shows that people that are more inclined to have relationships and aren't alone in this world are healthier physically, certainly mentally, but most certainly physically. And I'm really compelled by the fact that people are safer. They're safer from abuse and exploitation when they are self-determining and when they do have the understanding of choice in their life. So I think these aspects of why we need to look at self-determination, why we need to look at informed decision making and supported decision making are critical when it comes to the future of our support of people with developmental disabilities. And then when denied, it's the opposite of what I just talked about, right? There is a sense of disempowerment, right? Self-esteem, value. I mean, we all want to be valued, and when we're not allowed to make decisions, or somebody else makes them for us, as that previous slide had indicated, we're seen as less valuable. We're seen as less competent, and that's not the truth. That's just not the truth. Let's go to implications for direct support professionals. But before we do that, let's just, if you could just briefly, Desiree, just go over some initiatives. You talked about a couple of these in Texas, but just talk a little bit about some initiatives in the United States.
Well, part of supported decision making, the reason it came out is the UN Convention on People with Disabilities came out in 2000. Oh, I'm forgetting my dates. Came out with a statement saying that every person has the right to make their own decisions. And with that being said, states and countries are responsible for putting in the place the supports to be able to allow people to do that. And so we are seeing some legislation in the United States that's reflective of that. Even though the United States itself hasn't signed on to this, the Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities, it is still a very important document that's out there.
Mhm.
And so, as I've indicated, the first two states in the United States that recognized supported decision making legislatively is Texas and Delaware. Now, there have been some other bills that are in process, and I do think, I can't tell you what the other two states are, I think, that have bills at this point, but I know Alaska's working on statute. Virginia has been doing that, and we are actually hoping that in New York we'll be seeing some of that at some point in the nearer future. We know that there are studies happening in Maine and in Virginia and New Hampshire.
Mhm.
And then we have a pilot project that we've watched very closely here in New York, in Massachusetts. It's a very small pilot project, but they've made some really good inroads and a lot of things that can be learned from it. And then, of course, our pilot project, Supported Decision Making New York, we're working with Hunter College and the New York Alliance and ARC of Westchester.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Very interesting stuff, and I think people, if they're interested, we'll have some contacts at the very end we can give people. Yeah. Let's just go. This is critical, and I can probably go over this particular slide. Direct support professionals need to understand, I think, what we just talked about this last few minutes. They need to understand what actual decision making consists of, what it means for just oneself, but certainly what it means when you're helping people make decisions. And that the reality is people make decisions all the time, And in our system, sometimes decisions are literally made for people. Direct support professionals utilize individualized support plans, behavior support plans that are to be hopefully instituted and engaged with people, but oftentimes direct support professionals are doing, and I say this with great due respect, sometimes we're doing to people. And that's something that the decision-making process, if we really look at it and allow for that process to happen and assist people with that process, we can really change our system. And I think one of the reasons is that we don't want people to be hurt. We don't want people to make bad decisions. But the reality is everybody has a right to make a bad decision, and actually that's how you learn. You know, that's really how you learn from in life, is making terrible decisions, making mistakes. And if we take that dignity away from people, the dignity of risk, the dignity of blowing it, in some ways we're interfering with people's the rights that they have to learn and to make decisions. Um, and I think you said it before, Desiree, it's so important that we make sure that if we're helping somebody make a decision, we are making sure we understand what they want in terms of their values, their dreams, their beliefs, their religion, their world. And when we look at what being person-centered means, it comes down to having allegiance with that person, not the agency for which we work, not the necessarily even a family member, maybe even a guardian. We need to be respectful. We need to be very cordial, but at the same time, we also need to understand that we support that person, and that person is the first allegiance we have to them.
Jen, I really want to quickly. I want to just reflect on that because I know we're trying to wrap up.
Yeah.
But when a direct support professional needs to work with a guardian, the guardian has been assigned legally to make those decisions. I think when we look at our allegiance to the person and our role in working with that person and the guardian,
Mhm.
it is important that we have that relationship with the guardian as well, to a place that we can help that person that we're supporting communicate on their behalf their will and preferences, so the guardian can make informed decisions regarding that person, because that's what their role is. So, it may be important to say, I just wanted to share with you that John really would like to get a tattoo, and that we've discussed all of the pros and the cons to getting a tattoo, so that if you if you want to discuss that with him further, that that's something that he is interested in, and has received some information on it, so you can help support him in making the right kind of decision for him.
Great, great. So this is what I think we should do, just in the interest of time. I'm sorry we went a little bit later than we thought. So Kelly, I don't know if there's any questions that the listeners have for us. If there are, we'll certainly take them right now. That'd be great.
Great. Okay, well, let me go ahead and get started on the questions. The first question comes from Mary, and she asks, can you give some examples for people who do not use words and don't have a reliable yes-no response? So how can you do informed decision-making with somebody who has communication challenges and doesn't have a reliable yes-no response?
Hmm. Hmm. Desiree, you want that one? I could go all day on that one.
Go ahead then, Jen. I mean, I could answer it too, but go ahead.
I think it comes down to a couple things. One is this, Mary. I think direct support professionals, I know family members, you get to know your loved one through so many nonverbal cues, whatever those things are: eye twitches, nose twitches, the way in which people roll their eyes. Say a person does have a hearing impairment, say they're deaf. There are even ways in which through physical touch, eye gazes. I mean, there's just most communication we do know is really nonverbal. That said, it's a process. It's a process of making sure we do discover and understand where that person's coming from. we have to assume, regardless of the level and depth of the intellectual disability and the how profound that intellectual disability might be, we still have to have I think um, in our approach with that person, that we have to presume competence. We have to. That's our obligation, I think, as to one person, one human being to another. We have to presume in a dignified way that that person's competent, even though there might be very little brain activity or what have you. I recommend a book. It's by our friend and colleague Dave Hingsberger. It's called First Contact. It's one of the most important books I've ever read as a direct support professional. It's called First Contact, charting inner space. It's all about how do we establish relationships and contact with people who have significant disabilities. So that's what I can address for that question. Desiree, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, the only thing I would add, again, I do believe it's about the relationship. It's about the discovery. I want to reaffirm that. And the other piece is that, again, every person may not have competence, but every person has the capacity to make a decision. And we have to recognize that, you know what, so maybe you don't have a reliable yes, no. So you go with whatever you're going to get. And if that person doesn't want the decision that you're interpreting, then they're going to respond something in a different way, and you're going to get to know that. So it really comes down to some of your experience with that person.
Thanks.
Great.
Kelly,
Thank
do
you,
you
guys.
others?
Yeah, we have some other questions. Carol asks, what if a person does not learn from their choices despite numerous opportunities? So what do you do in that challenging situation?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? What if the person what?
What if the person doesn't learn from their choices despite numerous opportunities? So I'm assuming that an individual
They make the same mistake over and over again?
Yeah.
You know what? We all make same mistakes over and over again. I mean, maybe it's John made a mistake in choosing sugar with his coffee this morning. That's not for me to judge. But if ultimately his doctor says, you know what, you're not supposed to have sugar, or his waistline says you really need to cut out sugar, and he keeps deciding that, oh, it wasn't so bad yesterday, I'm going to do it again tomorrow, and then whatever his goal isn't met. That happens. Think about people who have multiple DWIs. I mean, they aren't learning either. As people, we have the right to make mistakes over and over again. And I think, the best that we can do is continue to inform people of the opportunities, find out maybe what it is they're seeking through the decisions that they're making to help support them and maybe getting what they're looking for in a different kind of way. And and go from there. That would be my response.
Yeah, and I'm with you, Desiree, on that. And I think I'm hearing you, Carol. We get put in this between a rock and a hard place sometimes as direct support professionals or as family members, right? Where this person, especially as direct support professionals, there's this notion of liability. Like if somebody is making a decision that is they're not learning something, it's dangerous, whatever it is that they're choosing to do, whatever they're quote unquote not learning. I think what we have to do some triage there. We have to do, and we do this with a team, and we do this with other people. We have to figure out if it's something so dangerous that's not being learned that ill affects that person or puts them in harm's way, certainly immediate harm. We probably have to intervene there. But if if it's something that's just the person is just not getting, that's not necessarily causing, the sky to fall, I think there's a process of documenting it, continuing the process of helping that person make a decision. And the reality is, like Desiree said, somebody might not learn something that we think is what they should learn, right? So, and other than that, good luck. I wish I had the answers for that one, because if we did, we'd be wealthy.
Okay, well, that takes us right to time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We do have a couple other questions that were asked that I'll shoot directly to the presenters to see if I can get answers from them. In addition, Linda Kendall Fields shared 2 resources in the chat box. She wanted to make sure people knew about the North Carolina Rethinking Guardianship Initiative, which is also currently funded by the DD Council. I'll make sure to send out a link to that initiative for you guys all to look at. And
that's a great site, too. I looked it up yesterday. It's really a wonderful site.
Good, good. And she also sent a resource of a sample supported decision-making agreement that's available through the National Resource Center for Supported Decision Making, and she provided a link. So I will send those out in the follow-up email. I would like to thank John and Desiree for your time today. We really appreciate it.
You got it. Our pleasure.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you all. Have a fabulous day.
You too.